Joining me around the table, Democratic strategist Margie Omero, Corey Day, contributing editor for The Root, and Kevin Madden, a Republican strategist and a CNN political commentator. Thank you all.
Thank you.
So what's John Boehner up to? I'm having a hard time. He caved on the debt ceiling, realized he couldn't get his Republicans to agree to something that didn't have an attachment to it, so he just threw it on the floor, voted for it, said, we're going to be done with it. Sounds to me a little bit like 2014 is a mid-year and we don't want to have another slam against the Republican Party.
Right. I mean, the other side of it, instead of caving, is that he had a good week through the help of Democrats by not skipping out on the check, which was what his caucus wanted to do. So, which is why he seemed cheerful as he left that press conference, singing even. I don't know if voters now are going to notice that the debt limit was raised. If a debt limit is raised in the woods, does anybody notice? I mean, I think people notice the conflict more than they notice the smoothness. But if you had told me last fall that we'd be here and we wouldn't have this showdown, I would have said, forget it. There's no way we don't have a showdown. Because I would have said last fall, absolutely, because the fall was so brutal for Republicans.
Yeah, well, let me agree with my Democrat friend that John Boehner did have a good week. It was the hard part was getting there. This is something that I think John has really it's been a process getting to this point, working with the particular conference that he has. But I think he's trying to get his members to fight the smart fights. And the smart fight right now is making this an election, this 2014 campaign, about the contrast between Republicans and Democrats on Obamacare. And now that we've moved past this and we don't have the prospect of a congressional showdown over something like the debt ceiling, he's in a much better place, and so is the conference.
Well, there's really no tangible contrast between Democrats and Republicans on Obamacare as far as the policy, because the Republicans haven't put forth a significant set of policies to fix Obamacare just yet. The key is with Boehner and the Republicans, they know from last fall how bad they looked in the polls coming off of that debt fight and the government shutdown, and they knew they couldn't repeat it. They know that everything rests on their ability to...
Still didn't vote for it. I mean, you still had the caucus saying, no, we want to do that again. I mean, to say that, well, they've learned their lesson, and they said, well,
Boehner did. I mean, it's a leadership thing, right?
It was politics 101. Boehner said, I'm not going to go down with this small Tea Party minority in my caucus just to lead us to another government shutdown. I'm not going to do it in a midterm election year. We have good enough numbers of doubt and questions among the electorate around Obamacare. So we're going to campaign on that. They're not going to touch this issue, and we've seen it, just like they're not going to touch
until
even
they're primaried by folks.
Well, except for, it is true that it allowed most of his caucus to vote against the debt ceiling. They can go home and say, I voted against it. And there was no big fight. Let me move you to the Senate side, where we had something similar, where in order to avoid a Ted Cruz filibuster, Republicans had to vote with Democrats to get past the filibuster and get to the vote. Mitch McConnell is in what may be a tough race. It's not altogether clear to me how tough the primary is going to be, or for that matter, the general. But has he been genuinely hurt, do you think, by what he had to do, which is he had to vote for moving on?
Right. He said, I have to protect the country and do my job, and that means shutting down a faction in his party, a vocal faction in his party, and again, allowing Democrats to vote the way they did. But, I think... Look, Mitch McConnell is going to be seen as a political operator regardless of this. This was true before that vote. It's going to be true after the vote. This is just another piece of evidence. But I think a lot of this is already baked in the cake for primary voters, and we'll see if Matt Bevin, his primary challenger, can use that to his advantage or not.
So less about conservative versus really conservative and more about inside Washington, outside Washington.
Yeah, and I think back in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell isn't in any worse off place than he was before this vote. I mean, he has had votes for raising the debt limit before that if conservatives back there who didn't like him wanted to use it against him, they could. But I talked to one really smart reporter up on Capitol Hill who covers the Senate and said, look, this was one of those cases where we skipped to the last chapter. We ultimately knew that this was going to have to happen on the Senate side, and it did. And I think Mitch McConnell will take a little bit of a hit on the early side, but he's still be in a much stronger position because we'll have the debt ceiling showdown off the table.
Let me ask you a question about Ted Cruz. I'm reminded of that song in Sound of Music. How do you solve a problem like Maria, where the nuns were trying to figure out what to do with this loose cannon? To me, that's kind of how do they solve a problem like Ted Cruz in the Republican caucus in the Senate?
Well, I mean, there was no plan. If he, he obviously wanted to continue to fight this debt ceiling debate, but there's no plan after that. There's no where do you go from here. They had to just go tell him to go sit down. I mean, they just pulled rank on him, slapped him, and said, go sit down.
He forced their votes?
Because he forced the votes, but really you have several senators who are in purple states where shutting down the government, where leading us to the brink of economic ruin is not playing well for them. They're this close, they think, to retaking the Senate. They don't want to toy with that.
What's interesting, just real quick, what's interesting on this is if Mitch McConnell, who's a master tactician of the Senate, doesn't have the answer to this, I sure don't. And I think what's really interesting is that, a lot of the usual tools that you have at your disposal as a majority leader to punish somebody like Ted Cruz, they aren't there because Ted Cruz does not care about moving up in the Senate.
That's right.
He doesn't care about what his profile is inside Washington.
And that's what makes it difficult.
Let me get you all to hold. You're first up out of the box. Our panel is going to stick with us, and when we come back, reading the tea leaves of Hillary Clinton's past and what they might suggest about her future. We are back with Margie, Corey, and Kevin. You all are like share now. No need for last names. Diane Blair, very close friend of Hillary Clinton, now deceased, kept notes. Treasure trove. They were available. Washington Beacon, I think, got a hold of them first. Among other things, there was a writing about Hillary Clinton's reaction. These are contemporaneous notes, like what Hillary Clinton said that day or the impression she got from Hillary Clinton. And this was her reaction to the Monica Lewinsky affair. It was a lapse, but she says to his, meaning the president's credit, he tried to break it off, tried to pull away, tried to manage someone who was clearly a, quote, narcissistic Looney Tune, but it was beyond control. I find this interesting for a lot of reasons, and one of them is how quickly that seems to have been, this was early on, how quickly it was almost forgiven. How does this play?
I don't think there is a single undecided or undecided leaning voter out there who's going to change their mind based on these papers. I think Republicans who want to dig through the archives as if they are Trekkies or Deadheads, take your pick, just sort of poring over the old archives, are not going to be demonstrating that they're the party of the future. It's going to very much make them remind people that they seem like the party of the past.
Sure, because Rand Paul has first questioned about, but later brought up again, the whole Lewinsky affair and President Clinton as predator and that kind of thing.
I think it's still, it's not anything that most undecideds or most sort of swing voters are really going to base their decisions on. But it's just the early vetting, if you will, of Hillary Clinton this time around. Rand Paul has been fairly, shrewd in sort of bringing this up into the dialogue so that at the end of the day, he can perhaps cleave away, and the Republicans can cleave away some women who might be leaning Republican who don't appreciate being reminded of that. And that reminds them of why they have doubts about Hillary Clinton. She still has negatives that they can exploit.
She's 2-to-1 approval rating. Approve
right
to
now.
Disapprove.
Bill
Clinton's 71%.
We know that's going to change.
For now, we do know that that's going to change. I think there is some news in here. There is some relevancy to the political debate inside these papers. But Margie's main point is right. The way to beat Hillary Clinton in 2016, if there is a Hillary Clinton candidacy, is not through Arkansas and it's not through the past. It is a litigation of the future of this country. Does America want somebody who is associated with Washington as president who's been here for 25 years? Do we want an Obama third term? Those are going to be the key questions that are going to aid Republicans in litigating that campaign. Not Arkansas, not the past.
And let's remember, there are a number of voters coming into the system who are already in the system that don't remember the Clinton years, which is like
they weren't even born.
Completely freaky to me. But okay. Yeah. One of the other things I liked out of this was in her relationship with the press. And Hillary said, I'm not stupid. I know I should do more to suck up to the press. I know it confuses people when I change my hairdos. I know I should pretend not to have an opinions, but I'm just not going to. I think we knew that about her. But the whole, I think part of that, bringing up she had an enemies list and she didn't like the press. I think there's a drama that is around the Clinton family, whether they created it or it's created around them, however you want to look at it, that the Lewinsky affair does kind of remind people of. And I don't think people like drama in there.
There's no doubt that with the Clintons come controversies and come a lot of drama, but at the same time, they've survived a lot of controversies. They have survived a lot of drama. So that's the one thing that you also do learn on presidential campaigns is that the level of scrutiny that comes with it. That's something that not many people have the experience in dealing with. That's why you don't.
And I think a lot of women find those attacks incredibly unfair,
Right.
wherever
It's not like she had the affair.
whatever they are.
Right.
And so I think anybody who attacks her needs to be
point,
cautious
though,
of
they
that.
may also find it very unfair that Hillary Clinton was one of the people inside the Clinton machine that was promoting an attack against the women who were questioning Bill Clinton's behavior.
But I think what you just read about her, what she knows, quote unquote, she should be doing with the press and what she doesn't, I think it does to some degree speak to sort of a little bit of rigidity that the Hillary Clinton campaign had in 2008 and that she's had to sort of responding to what's out there in the ecosphere among media. That will have to change a little bit. They'll have to be a little bit more nimble and responsive coming into 2016 if she's going to run.
Kevin Madden, great Dave. Margie, thank you all for being here very much. I appreciate it. To be continued with Hillary Clinton, as we all know. Coming up, a controversial verdict in the so-called loud music trial.